title of my sermon, Confessions of a Recovering Progressive. My scripture readings are from three of the most important people in terms of mentoring me. The first is from John Michael Greer. When you've driven down a blind alley and you're sitting there with your bumper pressed up against a brick wall, the way forward, the only way to progress, starts by backing up. Revving the engine and hearing it labor and rattle as the gas gauge moves steadily toward that unwelcome letter E, or praying for a techno-miracle, are not particularly useful responses. The next reading from William Catton, author of Overshoot, the most important book Connie and I have ever read in our lives. Human society is inextricably part of a global biotic community, and in that community, human dominance has had and is having self-destructive consequences. And the final reading from my great mentor, Thomas Berry, one of the most significant ecological and evolutionary thinkers of the 20th century. The most difficult transition to make is from an anthropocentric or human-centered to biocentric or life-centered norm of progress. If there's to be any true progress, then the entire life community must progress. Any so-called progress of the human at the expense of the larger life community must ultimately lead to a diminishment of human life itself. I found myself, since I was last here, over the last several years, really playing the role of cultural hospice worker or cultural therapist. Because much of my work has been helping progressives, my fellow progressives, people that are committed to values of inclusion, of expanding our circles of compassion, our commitment to peace and justice and ecological sustainability, all kinds of important social justice issues. I found myself in those circles because that's where I'm often invited to speak. I mean, any minister that believes that evolution's of the devil and all the evils of the world can be attributed to Darwin, I don't get invited there. So mostly I speak to moderate to liberal religious people, Unitarians, Christians, Unity, and others. Jewish synagogue back in April. But also to secular people who are trying to come to grips with our world, with why things have unfolded in the last year and a half in the way that they have, why things have unfolded in the way that they have for decades now in terms of ecological devastation, climate change, and other things. And then ultimately how to be present to the bad news, the things that are inescapably real, that are painful or difficult to accept. And then ultimately move through whatever stages of grief, whatever stages of anger and frustration and denial that we and our loved ones have, to come to the place of what my great mentor Joanna Macy calls active hope. Being involved in our local communities from a place of hearts of compassion and commitment, and recognizing that many things that we thought could be changed really can't. So, let me just back up, because what I want to focus on, every good sermon is supposed to have 3 points. So my 3 points are, remember who you are, remember what matters most, and then resolve to sweeten your legacy. So remember who you are, comes from the Lion King. Remember what matters most, and then resolve to sweeten your legacy. Because fundamentally, all the thousands and hundreds of thousands of things that have given your life meaning and that will continue to give your life meaning until you die, the final meaning of your life is your legacy. The final meaning of my life. And the final meaning of humanity's existence is our legacy. So let me first touch on the title, Confessions of a Recovering Progressive. I was born in 1958. I experienced sort of the 1960s and 70s, the sense of progress, the sense of that things would continue as certainly most of us have experienced over the last several hundred years since the discovery of fossil fuels, where there's been this expectation, and really more than an expectation, just an assumption that things would continue to get better and better for every generation. That I had it a little better, better meaning a little wealthier, a little easier, a little healthier than my parents, and they had it a little better than their parents. And there was the expectation that my kids were going to have it better than me. In other words, we get to stand on each other's shoulders generation to generation, and we would see moral progress, scientific and technological progress, social progress, and the sense of progress was usually understood as, in kind of a vague way, but that things would get better, and there would this be this expansion of possibility, expansion of opportunity. And yeah, there were those nagging environmental issues in terms of the quality of the water, the soil, the forest, the life, the climate upon which we depended. But, you know, we figured that technology and human genius, especially the more humans you have, the more human genius we can solve these things. And there was this expectation that there were many problems, but those problems, most of them would be solved by technology and human innovation. I expected that in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, even in the 1990s, even actually up until 2012. December 3rd of 2012 was when I had my crisis moment. Connie and I, actually I woke up before Connie and watched a video, and it was called Climate Change is Simple by David Roberts. Brought me to tears. I woke her up. We both watched it. Both of us were in tears. Climate change went from back burner issue to front burner issue. The sense of climate emergency. And then, rather quickly, we started studying, reading books, dozens and dozens of books related not just to climate, but to right relationship to the future, and right relationship to primary reality, the living biosphere, the ecosphere, the living world. And one of the things that we discovered over the last 5.5 years is that there is a profound difference between sustainable cultures and unsustainable cultures. And it turns out the major difference is their relationship to the future. Sustainable cultures don't have this sense that everything's supposed to be changing. There's this sense of continuity, that what you learned from your ancestors about how to live in right relationship to primary reality, whatever mythic name might have been given to primary reality, but we're talking about everything that is required for us to exist and to thrive. Right relationship to that means relating to the living world as a vow, or as a series of vows to be related to in an honorable, respectful way, rather than it's that we think we can exploit or use for our benefit. So, let me come to my 3 points. Remember who we are, remember who you are, remember what matters most, and then resolve to sweeten your legacy. Remember who we are. I began doing it with the kids, with the beads, that we are the universe. We are not separate from nature. We are the result of 14 billion years of unbroken evolution now becoming conscious of itself. We are literally nature uncovering its own nature. We're the universe becoming aware of itself, literally. So as Thomas Berry, my mentor, said, we can't be alienated, but we can feel alienated if our thinking is not aligned with reality. That's why beliefs matter. That's why worldviews matter. So if our worldview thinks that this is just sort of the backdrop for human existence and our real home is somewhere else where we die, then we're going to have a dysfunctional and even suicidal relationship to primary reality. We're going to treat the soil, the forests, and the water and the life upon which we depend, and upon which our grandchildren will depend, merely as resources to be used. So the first part of remembering who we are is that we are life becoming aware of itself. We are nature. And we need to relate to primary reality as primary. See, it turns out in sustainable cultures, all sustainable cultures for which we have evidence, that is, all cultures that could live for thousands of years without diminishing or destroying primary reality, did so because they basically were committed to the future first. Religion played a vital role to ensure that the future was never compromised by the present. You know, that's why indigenous peoples, indigenous cultures all over the world had this notion of, that we know from the Iroquois Federation, 7th generation. That is, you're inviting in your imagination and in your rituals future generations to judge what we do in the present. Because if we merely discern good and evil based on how it impacts me, my corporation, my family, my nation, my whatever, then we're basing good and evil, morality, ethics, only on the present moment. And so our greedy instincts can lead the way, especially when we have an economic system that is designed and has been functioning for hundreds of years to reward the few at the expense of the many, measuring progress by how fast we can take the biosphere and turn it into pollution, and forcing billions of us to betray the future just by pursuing the so-called good life. So we are living in a dysfunctional, anti-future economic system, and that's happened because religion has been asleep at the wheel for hundreds of years, because of what I call the triple idolatries. Idolatry of the written word, idolatry of the otherworldly, and idolatry of beliefs. Idolatry of the written word is where you think our best map of reality is frozen in time in some ancient text. Idolatry of the otherworldly is where you think ultimate reality resides, God, or whatever name was given, was only outside time and nature. And idolatry of beliefs is when you privilege beliefs over knowledge, rather than honoring knowledge as divine communication, divine revelation, evidence as modern-day scripture. And so because religion has been asleep at the wheel, in fact, I don't even like that analogy. I used to use that more. I now think that half of religion is gagged and tied in the trunk, and the other half of religion are in the back seat cheering on the psychopathic politicians that are driving us off the cliff. And again, it's not primarily because we're bad, evil, rotten, crummy, sinful people. We're part of systems, economic systems, political systems, governmental systems, agricultural systems that are anti-future in their design. So we can't just tweak things and expect that we're going to live sustainably. So the first thing I had to come to grips with is that we are not in expansion, we are in contraction. Turns out that we know of 32 civilizations that have become great over 2 to 4 centuries, and then their own greatness, their own hubris, becomes their own undoing, and they, treat nature as an it rather than a thou, and then they fall over 1 or 2 centuries. And then there's another civilization. 32 of these we know about. We're the 33rd, and we're in that process. If you don't understand that industrial civilization is in contraction and will contract for many decades, unless climate becomes really, really bad, which it could, but we are in contraction. And conservative values tend to predominate in contracting societies. Liberal, progressive values tend to predominate in expanding societies. That is, when societies have more than enough energy, more than enough materials, more than enough resources, the pie can grow, and everybody can have a bigger piece of pie. But when the pie is shrinking, when we have less than enough resources to support the population, and the only reason we can do that is because we're drawing on 500 million years of stored energy. So we've got this cheap, dense, concentrated energy that's going to go bye-bye very quickly, and then we're going to be back to as we were the first 98, 99% of human history, which is we powered our cultures using a little bit of solar and wind, but mostly human and animal muscle power and timber, trees. And that's the kind of energy that we're going to be back to. But if you don't understand that, and that in the contracting stages of civilizations, we see the politics unravel in similar ways. We see economics unravel in certain ways. We see social systems unravel. In fact, John Michael Greer, one of the people I read, talks about it as the senility of the elites. The elites become less and less in touch with what the vast majority of people are experiencing, and so the very wealthy become smaller and smaller, but very wealthy. The middle class washes out, and the poor class grows exponentially, until finally the elites end up as lamppost decorations, because the people won't stand it anymore. And we see that over and over again. But we also see talented despots emerge, demagogues, people who can unite the people with powerful rhetoric, because they're speaking to their real needs. And so when you understand contraction, then the last election that happened, you can be present to that, not from the place of, oh no, this shouldn't be, but from the place of, oh, right, this is what happens in contracting civilizations. which doesn't mean you're not engaged to help your community locally and nationally and internationally. We can be engaged as activists more passionately than ever, precisely because we're not freaked out, because we understand the nature of nature, the nature of reality. So, back to my 3 things. Remember who you are. How can we stay inspired in the face of contracting times? Because here's the bad news, and I know one of the things that denial is very deeply rooted. So most of us, and most of our loved ones, will be in denial. Climate change isn't real. Or if it is, it's not that big of a deal. Or technology is going to save us. We're not in contraction. Things are going to continue to span. The American empire, it's going to continue forever. You know, all this kind of stuff. So we can have compassion for ourselves and each other because denial is deeply rooted. So if you find yourself completely rejecting what I'm about to say, that's okay. And if you're lovely, if you try to talk to others about this and they reject it, let that be okay. So, as things contract, conservative values predominate. So what that means is those of us committed to the kind of values that we have been committed to for most of our lives, we get to play a role of ensuring that those vitally important values of compassion, integrity, self-responsibility, expansion of inclusion, peace and justice, sustainability, that we get to help those pass into the future. So, and it helps to know that we are the universe becoming aware of itself, that we're not separate, that whatever we're doing, it's the reality doing it through us, in us, life in us. Also to remember that we are mortal. Human beings, all of us, like all creatures, die. And our species won't last forever. In one of my longer programs, I paint out a 100-year timeline, and if the whole history of the universe is 100 years, Homo habilis, walking upright using stone tools, is on December 25th of the 99th year. The last week of a 100-year process. Homo sapiens, speaking symbolic words, where words point to a reality beyond them, the last day. But even that, for 98% of the last day on a 100-year process, we lived sustainably. That is, we lived in a way that honored primary reality as primary. Only since 11:20 p.m. until midnight on this 100-year time scale, if we're talking about right now, is December 31st of the 99th year, just about to go into the 100th year at midnight. At that time scale, only the last 40 minutes have we lived unsustainably. And if we survive, which we may not, but if we do, it'll be like the prodigal species. Yes, we squandered our inheritance. And yes, we're waking up to our predicament, in the pig pen, as it were. But we're coming home to reality. Whether you use mythic language to talk about reality as the goddess or God, or secular language, it doesn't matter. We're being forced to come home to reality. And that's a good thing. But what we find is the most difficult time is that when we are born into an expansion of possibilities, an expansion of opportunities, and then that shifts in our lifetime, and now we have to come to grips with contracting opportunities, contracting possibilities, and in a degraded world where the soil, everything that we rely on, think about a pyramid. You know Maslow's hierarchy, like a pyramid? You've got all the important, cool, fascinating human stuff up here, but it's on a foundation of soil, forest, life, water, climate. And if all of this is in precipitous free fall, if it's in, massive decline, then that's why those quotes that I use. You can't have a sense of human progress as if things are getting better and better for humans in a sick and dying world. At some point, in the pretty near future, we have to deal with the consequences. One of my favorite quotes, Robert Lewis Stevenson. Sooner or later, we all sit down to a banquet of consequences. That's the Great Reckoning. And we're in the early stages of the Great Reckoning, not because some supernatural being outside the universe is pissed off at us and punishing us. It's because there's consequences when we live out of right relationship to what's fundamentally, undeniably, and inescapably real. Namely, the ecosphere, the biosphere, the living world. So Unitarians get to play a vital role because most Unitarians aren't locked into those 3 idolatries, idolatry of the written word, idolatry of the otherworldly, and idolatry of beliefs. So we can help, but we can only help religion evolve if we are not anthropocentric, not human-centered. We have to be life-centered. And if we are life-centered and include not just social justice, but intergenerational justice, like justice for future generations, then we can play a profoundly vital, necessary leading role in helping religion come home to reality. So, remember who we are. Remember what matters most. This is the interesting thing. When they've done interviews with people that have gone through the Great Depression or various war situations, many of them, the vast majority, not all, but most of them, say that that was the most meaningful time of their life. Because in hard times, in chaos, in challenges, in breakdowns, in difficulties, one of the things I love about using these beads is that I have all the major catastrophes in Earth's history represented. And we now know that the major thing that drives creativity, that drives breakthroughs, is chaos, breakdowns, and bad news. So that when we understand that, and we understand that we're living in times of contraction, then our hearts can open up with compassion to be engaged, as I mentioned before, but we're also doing so from a place of recognizing that our role is to further the breakthroughs that emerged in our lifetimes and previously. So remember who you are, remember your mortal nature, and on this 100-year time scale, we won't last another month on this timeline. Because each month is 12 million years. No mammalian species our size lasts more than 5 to 12 million years. So humans will go extinct at some point. And being at peace with that, recognize that life will evolve, and other species will evolve. And so being at peace with our personal mortality and being at peace with our species' mortality is a great way to be passionately engaged in furthering our values. Because it's kind of like the person that goes on hospice and really comes to peace with their life. And they get in touch with what matters most. And what matters most are not things. What matters most are relationships. And so one of the things, the exercises that I always invite people to do is whoever has been a blessing to you in some way, maybe it was your second grade teacher, but anybody who's been a blessing to you, to simply communicate your gratitude. If we had time, I could tell you story after story, or tear-jerking stories about people that have done this, that have practiced gratitude, that express gratitude. It may be the most meaningful thing that we can do for other people. I'll tell you one story. I went to my second grade teacher. I hadn't communicated with her in 40 years. I gave her a copy of my book, and I told her that she was the only teacher in grade school that I could remember, and she had a profound difference in my life. Turns out she was retiring that Friday. I saw her on Tuesday. And the both of us just held each other and cried. It was just a little expression of gratitude. So when we express gratitude to the people that have been a blessing to us, I encourage you to actually make a list. And then once a week, just one time each week, write a letter, send an email, pick up the phone, go visit, whatever, but express your gratitude. You will blow people out of the water with joy, because that's what happens when we express gratitude. So again, that's attending to what matters most. Who of the people that you've harmed or betrayed or had a negative impact on? To go to those people and say, I just want you to know that I know what a shit I was. Boom! Do you realize what that does? Often tears result. Simply saying, I'm sorry. I'm genuinely sorry. I realize that I hurt you, I harmed you, or whatever. And if I could go back and do it again differently, I would really do it differently. That kind of communication. See, this is attending to what matters most, which is relationships. Family relationships, people who you used to be close to and now no longer are. I had a mentor years ago say, if you want magic to occur in any relationship where there used to be love, used to be affinity, used to be closeness, and now there's not, for whatever reason, I've never seen this fail to work, he said. You give them 100% credit for everything that did or does work in the relationship. You take 100% responsibility for whatever didn't or doesn't work in the relationship and shut up. And watch what happens. It is miraculous. Not easy sometimes. That's why doing this with someone else that can help coach you is good. So, remember who you are. That we are nature becoming aware of itself. We are the universe. We're not separate from it. And that we are mortal, and our mortality can be embraced. Attend to what matters most. What matters most is our relationships. And expressing gratitude and expressing regret are two of the most powerful, effective ways of improving relationships. And then finally, sweeten your legacy. Resolve to sweeten your legacy. As I shared before, the main thing that gives our lives meaning, like the final meaning of your life, is your legacy. And so as we attend to how we will, what we're passing on, you have gifts and skills. You have knowledge. You have things that could be passed on to a young person. Find some younger person to mentor. If you know how to sew, if you know how to can, if you know how to preserve, if you know how to garden, whatever. Those investments of time and energy in young people, investments of the future, being committed as much to intergenerational justice as social justice. It's living in a pro-future way and trying to live your life in a pro-future way. And we can all downshift. We can use less energy. We can drive less. We can fly less. We can eat lower on the food chain. Eat more vegetarian meals. We can all downshift in little ways. And one of John Michael Greer's books is called Collapse Now and Avoid the Rush. Collapse now and avoid the rush. And as we do that, it's not going to save the world. It's not going to save industrialism from hitting the wall. That's going to happen. That's inevitable. But it fills our souls, it fills our hearts, and nourishes community locally. And that's really attending to what matters most, and it's attending to your legacy. And the last thing I would say in terms of legacy is to take a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, so you've got two columns. And on the left-hand side, write all the things that light you up, that give you joy, that give you energy and a sense of fulfillment and happiness, things that you're good at, things other people tell you that you're good at, etc. List it all. And it doesn't even have to be anything practical. If it lights you up, write it down. At the top of that list, you put my great joy. Then on the right-hand side, list all the things where you feel the world's needs, or you feel the future's needs. Like not just where you intellectually know about it, but where do you feel it? Where do you get angry? Where do you feel frustration? And especially, where do you feel compassion? Where does your heart just break over something that's happening in your community or in the world? And you list all that. So you've got two lists, my great joy and the world's great needs, or the future's great needs. Then you just pay attention to your heart. You don't have to call it prayer or meditation if you don't want to. If you pay attention to this part of your body, there's wisdom when we ask this part of our body to help us find intersections on our list. What you're basically doing is trying to play mix and match. Where are the intersections between what lights you up, what gives you joy, what gives you energy, and the world's needs or the future's needs as you feel them? And those places of intersection, that's your legacy work. That's your mission. That's your vocation. Whether you make money at it or not is irrelevant. It's going to feed your soul to do it. And if you do this exercise with someone else, they're going to help you see intersections on your list that you'll miss. And you'll help them see intersections on their list that they'll miss. And one of the things that I consider grace is it's not just the good things that you do that pass on. Haven't there been people in your life that have made a profound difference in your life because of their lousy example? They were a total jerk, and yet you made some positive choice as a result. Now, do you honestly think that you haven't been blessing others the same way? So remember who you are. Embrace your mortality and embrace our species' mortality. We're not going to last forever. Whether we last another 50 years or another 5 million years, it won't last forever. And life will continue. The universe will continue. Reality will continue. So remember who you are. Remember what matters most, relationships. And the two most effective ways to improve relationships are expressing regret and expressing gratitude. And then resolve to sweeten your legacy. Whether that means broadening your legacy, deepening your legacy, it doesn't matter. Whatever it is for you that means you're having a more positive impact on the future, pro-future. And I suggest that in those three things, if we attend to that, then we who have called ourselves progressives can be present to the reality of contraction and be engaged as activists in ways that are far more empowering because we're not freaking out. We understand contracting civilizations. We understand contracting times. And we get to play whatever role we can play in being a blessing to the future. And I think that's really what it's about. Is how can we be a bigger blessing to the future, and how can we support each other in doing precisely that?